Damien Love is a Scottish writer living in the city of Glasgow. He's worked as a journalist for many years, writing about movies, music, and TV for publications such as the Sunday Herald, The Guardian, The Scotsman, Bright Lights Film Journal, Scotland on Sunday, and the Royal Photographic Society Journal. His debut children's novel, Monstrous Devices, was published in 2020. It's a deliciously dark thriller, enigmatic and atmospheric. When 12-year-old Alex receives an old tin robot in the post, the note from his grandfather simply reads, "This one is special." But as strange events start occurring around him, it doesn't take Alex long to suspect that the small toy is more than special. It might also be deadly. Just as things are getting out of hand, Alex's grandfather arrives, whisking him away from this otherwise humdrum life and into a world of strange, macabre magic. From Paris to Prague, they flee across snowy Europe in a quest to unravel the riddle of the little robot and outwit relentless assassins of the human and mechanical kind. The book was picked as a Times Children's Book of the Week. And in the sequel, The Shadow Arts, to be published in 2021, Alex and his grandfather are on a mission to the Black Forest, where legend and life interweave. To unravel some of the mystery, but leaving you enough to discover yourself when you read the books, I'm joined by Damien. So thank you for joining me today.
Thanks for having me, Nikki.
Can I just ask you, before we hear you read from the book, what was the starting place for this? Was it the robots themselves? Have you got a collection stashed away somewhere?
Well, no, sadly, I don't have one like Alex does, but I've always liked them. And the starting point for this was many years ago now. Somebody gave me an old tin toy robot as a gift. And one day I was just kind of looking at it and was really struck by how odd looking it is. I can tell you the name of it, actually, if anyone's interested. It's a toy called Atomic Robot Man, and it's based on an old Japanese toy that was made like at the end of the 40s or the early 1950s. And I love the look of many of these things, but Atomic Robot Man in particular, it wasn't quite as sci-fi cartoony as a lot of the robots. In fact, it's almost kind of got an expressionist look. It's got a European look. So that got me thinking. And at the same time as thinking about that, I hadn't been away anywhere for a long, long time. I really hadn't been on holiday for like 20 years or something like that. And I was thinking about places that I had gone to, you know, kind of longing to go somewhere. And one that had always really stuck in my mind, I'd gone a couple of times when I was younger, was Prague. So kind of almost without me being involved in a way, like the idea of this old toy robot and the idea of Prague started to kind of intertwine. And actually, as I went on, a lot of connections kind of started quite organically occurring to me. Like the word robot actually originates from Prague. So yeah, it kind of evolved. And also, I think because of the kind of style of the book, which is, yeah, I drawn like cliffhangers, like old serials, and it begins to develop a kind of a pace. And after a while, I was kind of almost running to catch up after the story. You know, the story was really telling itself in a way that I hadn't expected. I almost felt like I was uncovering a story that was already there, if I can put it that way.
That is so interesting to hear you say that, because often when I'm reading a book, you can kind of get a sense of what the initial starting point was. But I felt there were so many things in here. Which angle had it come from? Because they did seem to interweave so organically that it was quite hard for me to think, well, that must have been, you know, the initial idea, or that must have been the initial idea. But actually, they're so interconnected.
Yeah.
So that's really why I asked you that question, because I couldn't unpick, you know, where it was coming from. So beautifully do they interweave. We're going to get onto what some of those things are in a little while, but maybe this would be a good point, actually, if you could read us a small section so we can get a flavour.
Yeah, okay. Well, this is from quite near the start of the novel. Alex has recently received the old toy robot. It's the dead of winter, and so it's pitch black at night, and he's lying in his bedroom in the middle of the night, and then something wakes him up. So he became aware he was awake. Alex lay on his back in bed, eyes focusing on the thin, dim orange line in the ceiling where streetlight squeezed in through the curtains. Something had woken him. He lay listening, trying to work out what it might have been. The room was dark, silent, the house around it dark and silent, save for the slow tick of the clock in the hall downstairs. His eyelids wanted to close. He let them. 7 ticks later, his eyes popped wide. He definitely heard something. A small click, followed by a smaller whir. Frowning, fully awake now, he strained to catch it again. Alex sat bolt upright, peering in the direction of the noise. The noise stopped. Reaching out, he pushed the switch in the reading lamp above his bed. The sound came from somewhere around his desk. He couldn't think what could be making it. His eyes ran over the pile of maths homework, the unlit desk lamp, his laptop, the old toy robot beside it. His jacket hung over the chair and his school bag over that. He thought about his phone in his jacket pocket, but he knew he'd turned it off, and anyway, it wasn't that sort of sound. He looked back at the door, his desk, the chair, and there, just visible behind the chair leg, the edge of something that shouldn't be behind the leg of his chair. He angled the lamp to shine in that spot, sending long shadows shifting around the room. He stared at the thing, trying to identify it. The small shape remained mysterious, and the longer he stared in the dim yellow light, somehow more threatening. The whatever it was edged back out of sight. Puzzled, Alex stepped 1 foot out of bed. There came a furious little run of many clicks and whirs, and something came out from behind the chair, moving fast into the middle of the floor where it stopped. Startled, Alex pulled his leg quickly back under the covers and sat blinking at the thing in the carpet. A toy robot. One he'd never seen. It looked old, like clockwork, red, mottled tin, boxy and square, with tiny vents in its chest and a sad little face pinched onto a cube head topped with a flimsy wire hoop, like an ancient TV aerial. With a the head turned until the face seemed to be looking at him. Alex sat transfixed. This time the robot on the floor hadn't moved. The sound was coming from somewhere else. Lifting his eyes with effort, Alex looked behind it. There were 2. This other one was much the same design, but a silvery blue, and it was somehow climbing the leg of his chair as though heading towards his desk. The red robot stood on the carpet, looking disconcertingly like it was watching him. The blue robot climbed higher, scrambling onto the seat of the chair with awkward little movements that would have been funny, were they not so weird. Keeping his eyes fixed on the red robot and with no clear plan in his suddenly empty mind, Alex, moving very slowly, started gingerly to lift the bed covers away. A sudden, fast made him freeze. This sound was angry, and it was very close. Alex turned towards the bottom of his bed, where there now stood a small, thin, white robot with a head like an elongated egg and sharp, silvery arms. The face in this one was frowning. Eyes wide, Alex sat motionless, watching as this thing pulled itself steadily up the bed towards him. He opened his mouth to shout, but found he couldn't remember how. He felt it click and clamber along his leg, onto his belly, onto his chest. Finally stopped where Alex's folded hands lay out on top of the quilt, and there it cocked its head, frowning its painted frown. Neither of them moved for what felt like a long time. The thing shook its head from side to side. One of its little arms raised, and Alex saw that it tapered to a point sharp as a needle. A thin, brown liquid dripped from the tip. And I think that's a good place for me to stop reading.
I tell you what, you're good at those robot noises.
Hours of practice.
Can we start with robots before we get further into the story? And you mentioned Karel Capek as the creator of the word robot.
Yeah.
And sometimes his stories have been read as sort of anti-technology, and it's a recurring theme through stories with intelligent robots that we've had ever since then, really.
Yeah. Well, I mean, his story, which is called RUR, I think the robots in that are more of a metaphor for like the working class, because it's all about a revolution that kind of comes up. But I think in the early days of science fiction, when the idea of robots started getting written about more, that very gradually became the kind of standard warning, like the dangers of technology, the dangers of science kind of unchecked. And I guess even before Chapek was writing and came up with the word robots, we've got Mary Shelley with Frankenstein. But then, you go back before Mary Shelley and Frankenstein, you've got like folk legends and stories of just the magic getting out of hand. So, and I think anytime you write about robots or artificial intelligence or whatever, you're really writing about humanity. And that's a double-edged sword, because it's what it means to be human, i.e., do the machines that we create then become human, like the Pinocchio thing? But the other side of that is how much of our humanity are we giving away or abdicating? So, it's a kind of deep pool to swim in. And slightly unrelated, but the story that I've been thinking about a lot over the past year is E.M. Forster's short story, I don't know if you know it, The Machine Stops. I think it was around about 1926, possibly even earlier. And if you find it, you'll suddenly realise this is the most prescient story that's ever been written in terms of technology, because it's all about a society where you can't go out any longer and everyone's connected by video screens, and the machine provides everything the way our phones kind of are beginning to do for all of us. And it's basically what happens when the internet just dies overnight, like what's left and how do people cope. And I think it's just an incredible vision of that thing about, how much do we give away and what do we lose?
Now, having heard you say that, there are quite a few connections, obviously, into your story. One is the sense to which giving away your humanity is made quite physical and literal, with the kind of giving of the blood to the robot or bits of yourselves to the robots. And then, of course, the other thing is that around this word that's very important in your story, which is power, and who has the power, who seeks the power, and how they're going to use it, which is, I suppose, coming back to the title, Monstrous Devices. Are the devices the robots, or are they the plans for how we're going to use them? Yeah.
Well, it comes from Shakespeare. I don't know if he picked it up from someone before him, might have done. But when I first wrote this story, because it took like 10 years before it was published, when I wrote it at first, like devices wasn't a word we were hearing like every single day. And it's kind of funny how quickly the culture shifted, so that devices is now like an everyday word, and that it means anything. But yeah, no, that is the play. Is it these little machines, or is it the schemes behind them? So yeah, I was quite happy with that title.
It's a pretty good title, it has to be said. Do you know, I want to talk a little bit about the grandfather. I love this character, and a lot of the mystery in the books is the mystery that surrounds him. He's a very ambiguous character. I thought of him as a mix between a bit of a Van Helsing, a bit of a Drosselmeyer from The Nutcracker, and a little bit of John Steed with his bowler hat and his cane. And he's pretty nifty with that as well.
You're not far wrong with all of those. When I was writing this, like one of my kind of regular jobs, I did television criticism every week for a newspaper. And I wasn't really writing about children's TV, but I got to thinking about the kind of TV that I'd watched growing up. And I think there was a sort of harder-edged, they weren't afraid to disturb you, to hook you, and also to make you think about stuff. I'm thinking about programmes like Children of the Stones and The Changes, which were just very, very strange and dark, and had lots of big ideas going on in them. And so I was kind of thinking about that sort of level of ambition, I guess. And you mentioned the Avengers, and it struck me that it's actually quite hard to work out who they're aimed at, because there's a lot of very sophisticated stuff going on, but then some of it's just quite kind of goofy. And I found it very hard talking about this book when people say, what age is it for? And you're like, well, it's for your age. Whoever you are asking the question, I hope that you'll find this entertaining, and I don't think entertaining is a bad thing. Officially, it's classed as 9 to 12, but I think my ideal reader would be maybe someone who read it when they were like maybe 11 or 12, and it stuck with them, and then returned to it maybe 20 years later and read it again, because that was another thing for me when I was writing this book. I was thinking about when I was that age and how your kind of horizons in terms of like culture suddenly start exploding. Like for me, finding out about cinema from Hitchcock to David Lynch showing up on Channel 4, and at the same time like getting into music, and the groups or musicians I was into either made a lot of literary allusions, and so I'd go and check that stuff out, or the people who are writing about them and like the NME or whatever, the reviewers would make literary allusions, and so you begin to kind of piece all these things together, so you might pick up something by this guy Anthony Burgess because you've heard that this band's into this thing called A Clockwork Orange. And so I, to some extent, I guess, unconsciously and to some extent very consciously started filtering in a lot of that stuff into this book. Just these references that build up, like Franz Kafka is in there, and every now and then there's an allusion to a band, which is kind of might be buried quite deeply, and you'll be aware of it or you're not, kind of thing. And a lot of it was about being that age, the age that Alex is in the book, just being that age and then just getting thrown into the world, which is essentially what happens to Alex. So yeah, but above all, I need to stress it's about getting chased by robots over rooftops. So don't be put off.
Above all, it's a thrilling story. But what you've said there is that it gives the writing texture that you don't necessarily have to be aware of. You did talk about film though, and of course there's one of the chapters that does reference a Hitchcock film. Maybe there's more that I've missed, but there's North by Northwest basically, or it's one of the chapter titles in there. And I did get a sense as I was reading it how much of the visual imagery was about light and shadow. There was a lovely, it's just 2 lines put together where you talked about a weary fluorescent light, and I was immediately in the lighting mood of that story. And so much is about snow and black branches and black silhouettes that I could almost have seen this story unfurling before me in black and white.
Well, black and white always makes everything look better, I think. But yeah, well, it's kind of a technical thing, but I did try to quite a large degree write this book from a kind of cinematic sort of viewpoint, by which I mean is there's like, you see the story from a certain point of view. I'm not inside Alex's head, the main character. It's not a first person thing, partly because of that whole mystery aspect and the mystery of the characters and decisions that they make. But I certainly did very much see the book, and I tried to write what I saw, and I'm very glad that came across for you.
Beautiful glowing globe lamps, and I was following the light all the way through the shadows, and it was great. So anyway, let's get back to the plot and the story for a moment. Alex and his grandfather, he's allowed to go to Prague to try and put right some of the things that are going wrong with his robot that he's been given, which has got certain powers attached to it. And it takes them to Prague, which is a wonderful city. And as you said, it comes together very handily with the robot side of the story. But we start to learn more about the particular legends of Prague and the golem of Prague. Tell us how you encountered that story and how it came to be part of Monstrous Devices.
Well, I mean, you really just have to scratch the surface in Prague, and you're suddenly already knee deep into its occult history, and it was very much the centre of alchemy in Europe and a centre for all sorts of strange stuff. And it's actually visible in the fabric of the city when you go there. Like the most famous bridge in Prague is the Charles Bridge, and I don't particularly go into it in this book, but there are stories that whole part of the city was actually built according to an alchemical code. It's all to do with certain numbers and amounts of steps and amounts of bricks and the directions things are pointed in. And And every corner you go to there in that city, there are all these little codes and references to just like the maddest magical stuff. So once I started thinking about the city, I couldn't not be writing about that to some extent.
Something about, I mean, what was Czechoslovakia, now the Czech Republic and Slovakia, they're places where old toys were made. And so, you've got your toy shop at the beginning of that, and it's, delicious. I think everybody's seen that monkey with the symbols on so many things. Yeah. I know exactly what it looks like.
Well, it's again, it's that whole part of Europe, I guess, like the Grimm fairy tales are the most famous. And, things like Pinocchio and like the Nutcracker you mentioned, all of this stuff, like the toys come to life. And it's just that slightly expressionistic folk Europe sort of feel kind of lurking behind the present city. And so, yeah, I'm really trying to touch on all of that stuff, but while still keeping it. It's a balancing act between the old-fashioned and the contemporary. Like the very first page in the book, I make a point of inserting like a reference to like a McDonald's restaurant, because the way I'm describing the city, it could be any time, kind of quite consciously. And so I throw in the fast food restaurants. So like I think for the first couple of lines, you're not quite sure when you are. So yeah, I'm trying to have the past and the present sort of bumping up against each other all the way through the book.
I've got a couple of very specific questions for you.
Go on.
Salt as your silver bullet. Where does salt come from as a thing that can stop this? This is the correct use of salt. Is it?
Yeah. If you pick up any dictionary on superstitions and go to the S section, you'll find pages and pages on salt, and its use in warding off evil, and you throw it over your left shoulder if you spill it. So it gets into the devil's eye. And there are many, many, many superstitions surrounding salt and its uses in warding off evil and cleansing and purifying. And I can't claim
take credit
that one. No.
But it's very reassuring, because I have got plenty of salt in the house and I don't have many silver bullets.
Better with the salt, I think.
Definitely. The other one is about grandfather. He's got some pretty bad habits. He smokes, he eats all the things that he shouldn't eat. And I wondered whether this was you pushing against the nanny state that tells us all the things that we shouldn't be doing.
Well, maybe. But I'd like to hope and believe that there are kids out there who've got grandfathers, grandmothers who still do all those things, But as he says quite often in the book, he grew up at a time before we knew better about all of that stuff, and it's kind of too late for him to change his ways now. He has his pleasures in life. He likes the odd cigarette and the odd drink, and sweets,
and and a full battered piece of fish. Why not, for goodness sake?
Yeah, well, fish and chips, nothing wrong with that.
I do want to ask you, because things are resolved for the time being when we get to the end of Monstrous Devices, but there are further adventures to come, and Shadow Arts will be out soon. Now, my understanding is that Alex is back with his grandfather to search for, we haven't even talked about the wonderful Harry, but they're going to help solve a problem that Harry's been working on out in the Black Forest, another great place for a story. Come on, tell us about this.
Well, one of the things that a lot of people have said after they've read Monstrous Devices is there's a lot of questions that they've got that haven't been answered. And hopefully the second book answers pretty much all of those. The Shadow Arts, the sequel, basically picks up almost exactly at the end of Monstrous Devices. It's like a couple of months later, basically. And Alex, after his adventure in the first book, has wound up back home, and he's living with the consequences of like a decision or two that he made. He hasn't really heard much from his grandfather for like the months in between, and then suddenly he crashes back into his life, and he needs Alex to help him with a mystery that grandfather and his pal Harry have been working on. And it leads us again through Paris, this time over into Germany and the Black Forest, which is, as grandfather says at one point, it's kind of where all these stories came from in the first place.
Oh, Damien, thank you so much for talking to me today. I can't wait to get into the shadow arts, and thank you so much.
Well, thank you.
In the Reading Corner is presented by Nikki Gamble and produced by Alison Hughes. If you have enjoyed this podcast, please do leave a review for us. To find out about other projects, including an audience with events and the Exploring Children's Literature Summer School, visit www.exploringchildren'sliterature.uk. Join us again soon in the Reading Corner on your favourite podcast platform.